Our first scripture lesson this morning is from the book of 1 Kings, chapter 19, verses 1 through 15a. It can be found on page 313 of your pew Bibles. We're continuing on with our reading from Elijah in 1 Kings. This is Elijah's story as a prophet of the Hebrew God. Remember, at this time there were other gods being worshipped, Baal being one of the chief ones, one of the pagan gods, and there were prophets of these other gods being worshipped as well, or they were worshiping their gods rather. And so there's a little interaction that happens between Elijah and some of these other prophets in today's lesson. Remember, this is suggested that is history, but this is more prophetic interpretation of history, not strict history as you might understand it in a history classroom or something like that. So we'll read here in the 19th chapter. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid. He got up and fled for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. "It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you." He got up and ate and drank. Then he went in strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altar, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus." And our gospel is from Luke chapter 8, verses 26 through 39, found on page 898. Admittedly, we have a pretty strange story here in Luke's gospel this morning. Luke, or Jesus, is in the non-Jewish Gentile territory of the Gerasenes, and he encounters a man who is possessed by a demon. Now remember, in biblical days, they would have equated illness or disease or something like that with demonic possession. We don't understand it that way today, let's make that clear, but the Bible is operating under this assumption. So when Jesus encounters this man, he is really doing something to heal him or to comfort him by working through this demon to get it out of this man. Or, as Ron Mills once put it in a Bible study, Jesus really just wanted to see some deviled ham. So, if you know the story, it's a really bad joke. Never mind. We'll read here in chapter 8. Then they arrived at the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. As he stepped out on land, a man of the city who had demons met him. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he did not live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he fell down before him and shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the God Most High? I beg you, do not torment me," for Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many times it had seized him. He was under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the wilds. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. They begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Now there on the hillside a large herd of swine was feeding, and the demons begged Jesus to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When the swineherd saw what had happened, they ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came out to see what had happened, and when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told them how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged him that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." So he went away, proclaiming throughout the city how much Jesus had done for him. May God's blessing be upon the hearing and the understanding of this holy word. For some of us, this week marked the end of another academic year. Church school ended last Sunday. Kittery schools got out on Wednesday. 199-year-old Bangor Theological Seminary graduated their last class yesterday. And I know that many others who call the classroom their home recently have shifted into summer mode as well. Now, I don't know about you, but when I get to the end of the school year, it always makes me think back to the days when I was in class. However, it's hard for me to remember those days being full of carefree joy, as it was for many students and teachers this week. With graduate work being my last foray into school, I remember those days leading up to the end being full of tons of reading, papers galore, and exams all over the place. Not the most enjoyable. And so, since that's what I remember the end of school being like, I thought I'd make myself feel at home this morning by offering a little exam to begin on this first Sunday of the summer. Relax, there are no grades on this test except the one you give yourself, and the answers are multiple choice. So here goes. You are behind a driver who has not noticed that the light has turned green. How do you respond? Give them a moment to notice. Blow your horn immediately. Blow your horn and express your irritation in some verbal or physical manner. You are in a slow-moving grocery line with some time to spare. What are you most likely to do? Engage someone in conversation, look repeatedly at the register to see how fast things are moving, become irritated. Something has interrupted your planned activity for the day. How do you feel? Interested? Disturbed? Aggravated? Which word best describes your mood at the beginning of an average day? Excited? Burdened? Depressed? Which word describes your emotional state at the end of an average day? Contented? Fatigued? Stressed? When you see a rainbow, how long does it hold your attention? Many minutes, several seconds, just a second? When was the last time you paid serious attention to a child? Today? Within the past few days? I can't remember. How much time during the day do you devote to prayer, pondering, meditation, or just taking it easy? At least an hour? At least half an hour? Less than half an hour? How often do you feel joy in your work? Frequently? Often enough? Really? Are you kidding me? How often do you move fast when there's no reason to hurry? Never? Sometimes? Okay, I confess I checked my watch while you were giving this test. So how'd you do? Which answers do you wish were different? Which answers are you happy with? However you've scored on this exam, I would invite you to keep that quiz in mind this morning as we turn our attention to someone who probably would have done well to take such a test, our old friend Elijah. So in that reading that we read from 1 Kings, you probably recognize that there's a lot missing to that story. In reality, we probably should have started back in chapter 18 to understand more of what's going on here. So a little bit of background is warranted. Under David and Solomon, all of the tribes of Israel were organized into one united kingdom, as you may know. After Solomon's death, however, the people in the 10 northern tribes rebelled against the Davidic line of kings and set up their own kingdoms, which they called Israel. Only the tribes of Judah and Benjamin remained loyal to the Davidic line of kings who continued to rule over the southern kingdom called Judah. Then during the 9th century B.C., King Ahab ruled the northern kingdom, and it was during this time that he had cemented an alliance with his Phoenician neighbors by marrying Jezebel, the daughter of the king of the Sidonians, and by promoting worship of their god, Baal, alongside worship of the Hebrew God in the kingdom of Israel. Next time you're at a social gathering, feel free to share that and impress your friends. Anyway, chapter 18. Elijah, the prophet, arrives on the scene of Mount Carmel, where 450 prophets of Baal have also gathered, and he decides to stage a little competition. Baal's prophets will get a bull, and Elijah will get a bull. Each will cut up their bull into pieces and place it on a sack of wood for a sacrifice, but will light no fire to the wood. Then they will each call on their god, and the god who answers will be considered the true God. So the prophets of Baal cry out to their god from morning until noon, even cutting themselves to show their allegiance to their god, but nothing happens. Elijah, mind you, wastes no time in mocking them, suggesting that Baal might be meditating or on a journey or sleeping. Then he furnishes his own altar to the Hebrew God, and what do you know? God sparks a fire beneath Elijah's bull. But that's not all. Having won the competition, Elijah goes on to fulfill the letter of the Deuteronomistic law by ensuring that each and every prophet of the competing god is killed. Cheery story. This mass murder, as you might imagine, angers Jezebel, a Baal worshiper, to no end, so she decides to make Elijah pay. And what does he do? He runs. He runs into the wilderness, lays down beneath a tree, and asks God to kill him. He's done being a prophet, he's tired, he's burned out, he's overworked and underpaid, and the hazards of the job are just too much for him. Even though God has just done great things through him, his state of mind can't see that, as he experiences himself as a failure. He just wants to be done with all of it. But God doesn't kill him. No, God first sends food to sustain him on a journey ahead, and then God tells him to go and stand on the side of a mountain. Recognizing that nothing unimportant in Scripture happens on mountains, God tells him to go and watch and wait, because God's about to pass by. Huge winds blow, an earthquake erupts, a fire breaks out, but God is nowhere to be found in any of these massive displays of nature. No, instead, Elijah encounters God in the sound of silence. Other translations will render this differently, as a still small voice, a thin whisper, or even a faint murmuring sound. However you translate it, the point here is clear. God was in the quiet. To put a modern spin on it, God was not in the hail and winds and torrential rains that battered the seacoast this past Monday, but was in the rainbows that popped up following. Now let's be clear here what has just happened. The first thing to note is that Elijah never says that he needs a visit with God. Remember, Elijah's done. He wants to die. It's when he has reached that limit that God says to him, "So Elijah, now that I have you as a captive audience, listen up. Slow down. Stop running. Stop complaining. Stop wanting to end your life. Just listen." And that's when Elijah hears God. He slows down, he quiets down, and is finally able to hear and understand that God has something else in store for him. It's a message that we would all do well to hear. You don't need me to rattle off how busy we are in today's world. You took that quiz this morning. You know how well you scored. But what you do need to hear is that oftentimes it's hard to hear God in that busyness. In all that racing and rushing and running, we miss the word that God so desperately needs to speak to us. Perhaps because so many of us find our life's meaning in our busyness, making space for God is tricky. Which is why we need to learn from Elijah. He pretty much worked himself to death. In fact, if he had his way, that's how things would have ended. It's only when he could physically do no more that God finally got him to listen. And it was in that listening that Elijah heard that he was still useful and that God still had plans for him. We, my friends, would do well to get to that same place, not of working ourselves to death, of course, but of listening. The score on your quiz this morning ought to show you how urgent a matter this is for you. Perhaps you scored well and your life is not running at the frenetic and frantic pace that most of America is. If so, congratulations. Keep up the good work. Keep listening in those moments of peace and quiet, remembering that God so often comes to us when and how we least expect God to. But then maybe you scored poorly. If so, consider it a wake-up call. Consider this as God whispering in your ear, You, right there, come here, stand here. I have something to talk to you about. And maybe that word will be, keep up the good work. Keep doing what you're doing. Maybe it will be, have you considered maybe trying this path over here? Or maybe it will be, it's time right now to stop what you're doing and do things very differently. Who knows, you just need to get to the point where your busyness doesn't block out your ability to hear. And how do you do that? Follow a child's example? Noah would stop and smell every single rose if we let him. We ought to let him more than we do. Take that red light as an opportunity to turn off NPR or that 80s hair metal station that you love and just listen without counting the seconds until the light turns green. Go for that walk that you've been meaning to take today, not tomorrow. Give yourself permission to unplug, to go off the grid. Take the first 5 minutes in your office in the morning for prayer or meditation. Silence that voice inside of you that is telling you that your worth is measured by how hard you work. My friends, the summer is the perfect time to give this a try so that by the time you get to the fall and life's busyness returns, this quieting will have become a way of life for you. I have no doubt that you will come to enjoy the unexpected blessings of that peace and silence. And who knows? You might just find God in the sound of silence waiting to meet you, giving you advice for the road ahead. Or you might find something else, as Sherry L. Smothers' poem Along the Way suggests so poignantly. She writes, "Walking through my life hurriedly, I saw thoughts flash by. And in my rush to end my day, I went right by a gift for me. Only in my bed did I realize that thing was a blessing in the road. I wanted it, so I hoped I could go back and get it, but the next day when I went to see, there was an old man, standing, smiling, because he got the blessing that was meant for me. I decided to slow down for a week, to see what I might find along my path to bless me. I walked slowly, more deliberately, acknowledging people along the way, feeling the breeze, watching the blowing leaves. At the close of the week, there was nothing I could find along my path that was a gift to me. I sniffed the last flower and picked up the pace, all right with having missed my gift. After I was back to my schedule for a month or so, I looked back at that week. I searched my path for a blessing and found not one thing. I reflected on how nice that week was, never minding. And the last of that reflection came with tears. The peaceful pace I had touched that week, almost as though someone else received it, was the stuff that was my treasure." My friends, you might just find that God is saying to you that the peace and quiet is what you really needed. Amen. Our final hymn in the black hymnal, 311, Renew Your Church.